We're in John 7, uh, verses 25 through 36 today, and just kind of continuing through it. Today's message is probably a little bit more like a Bible study than a sermon, probably. We're just kind of going through an episode that Jesus is dealing with uh, during the Feast of Booths, and you can kind of go back the last couple of weeks and get some more context on that. For sake of time, we probably won't do a whole lot about that today. Needless to say, Jesus is the Messiah, and he must be worshipped. And yet, he's having he's dealing with opposition. There are a lot of people who are rejecting him, even here at this feast that Jesus is attending. The religious leaders in Judea, they reject him. The Jews in the Capernaum synagogue earlier in the Gospel of John, they rejected him. A lot of his followers had even turned away from him. One of the closest 12, Judas, would stab him in the back, basically. Even his own brothers had rejected him for a time. So the theme that we've seen kind of building, one of the themes we've seen building in the Gospel of John is just this theme of rejecting Jesus. Some people thought that he was a good man. Other people thought that he was leading people astray. But the religious leaders, they want to kill him. They want him dead, and they don't even want to hear his name. They'll put you right out of the synagogue. Jesus is different than those religious leaders in his day. These guys, and they know it. It's part of the reason why they don't like it. These guys teach under human authority, but Jesus teaches under God's authority. And he's not appealing to the authority of the fathers and the authority of different Jewish rabbis or stuff like that. Now, again, you might remember Jesus is they're at Jerusalem. It's the Feast of Booths. We're probably talking about 6 months before Jesus' death. And in this chapter, Jesus had just called the people. Well, here, check it out. He had just called the people to not judge according to outward appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. Now, Jesus is the Messiah of God, and he speaks the truth of God. And these guys, they weren't seeing, they weren't that. They were judging outwardly, not judging the heart. Today, in just a few verses we're going to look at, the questions about Jesus continue to mount. And the opposition against Jesus continues to mount. So let's look at verses 25 and 26 today. So some of the people of Jerusalem were saying, "Is this not the man whom they are seeking to kill? Look, he is speaking publicly, and they're saying nothing to him. The rulers do not really know that this is the Christ, do they?" So the people of Jerusalem are here at the feast, and they're wondering what's going on. Like, they know that the religious leaders want to kill Jesus, the people do. And they're shocked that Jesus can stand here and teach and preach openly. They don't seem to understand the mindset of the religious leaders. Why, if he's not the Messiah, why not just arrest him right now? The religious leaders, though, they're more devious. They know that Jesus has a certain popularity. They know that taking Jesus publicly and arresting him publicly could stir up some trouble. And so they want to do things privately. They want to be sneaky, at least for now, they want to be sneaky about how they do it. And by the way, that's how Satan works in the darkness, in sneaky, underhanded ways. Well, anyway, the people of Jerusalem, they don't quite get this yet. And they wonder, the rulers, verse 26, do not really know that this is the Christ, do they? In other words, this statement, this question they're asking, it could be translated, can it be that the rulers truly know that this man is the Christ? Do they like, they wonder if the religious authorities deep down inside, if they think that this is the Messiah? Maybe those religious authorities know more than we know. Maybe they have new information. Maybe Jesus of Nazareth is the Messiah? The people start to wonder. So you can kind of see this question developing in their mind a little bit. And yet, even while they wonder if Jesus is the long-awaited Messiah, they clearly doubt that that can be the case, uh, because they say in verse 27, however, we know where this man is from. Like that word, however, really kind of shows this question. We know where this man is from, but whenever the Christ may come, no one knows where he's from. Now, the Jews of Galilee had already said in John 6:42, is not this Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How does he now say, I have come down out of heaven? Later in John 7, in the chapter we're in today, uh, some Jews will say, this is the Christ. Others will say, surely the Christ is not going to come from Galilee, is he? And so the Jerusalem Jews think, in verse 27, they think they know where Jesus is from. They think they know about him. They think he's an uneducated carpenter from Nazareth. They don't understand the full picture. They probably don't understand that he was born in Bethlehem. They certainly don't understand that he existed in eternity past. And they see Jesus as a man, and at best, maybe a solid teacher or a prophet. But they don't recognize who Jesus is. You know, there are a lot of people like that today. People who doubt that Jesus was the Son of God, or they'll just outright reject that fact. They don't want to submit to a holy and righteous God. They don't want to make the necessary changes in life. They suppress the truth and unrighteousness. There are other people who think a little bit better about Jesus. They think he was a moral teacher or a moral example. They think he was some great historical figure, even, but they don't understand who Jesus is. They don't understand what Jesus has done for them, and they don't place their faith in him. And so they're lost and dying and going to hell. And there may be people like that listening to this message right now who think, yeah, I have a lot of respect for Jesus. He's a great man. They don't really grasp what he did for them when he died on the cross to pay the penalty for your sins, a penalty you could never pay. Anyway, when Jesus hears the crowd and he hears some of these questions mount, he clarifies the situation a little bit, verses 28 and 29. Then Jesus cried out in the temple, teaching and saying, you both know me and know where I am from. And I have not come of myself, but he who sent me is true, whom you do not know. I know him because I am from him, and he sent me. Yes, they know Jesus. Yes, they know a little bit about Jesus' human life. That is, they know that he's the son of a carpenter. They know that he lived in Nazareth and now Capernaum, but they still don't understand who he really is. And they still don't understand his true origins. They don't understand that Jesus is the Messiah of God. They don't understand this because they don't know God. God the Father is the one who sent him, and they do not know him. Now, that's a pretty serious charge to make to Jews who are the covenant people of God. They see themselves as God's chosen people. And as a nation, they were. They understood that they're in a covenant relationship with him. That is, God had made promises to them. But the problem is, they don't know him. They've been rejecting God's messengers for hundreds of years, and now they're rejecting his Messiah, and that proves that they don't know God. It proves that they don't have a real relationship with him. They're of the world, and they don't really know him. And if you reject Christ, you do not know God. Neither is there salvation in any other, for there is none other name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved. Acts 4:12. If you reject Christ, you do not know God. There's no other way to be saved. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. John 14:6. If you reject Jesus Christ, you do not know God. You're rejecting the good news. You're rejecting the only thing that can save you. And if your understanding of Christ is insufficient, and you don't recognize that it's only by faith that you can be saved, then you're lost. If you think you can contribute to it in any way, you're lost. If you think that any work you can contribute helps you get saved, you're lost. If you think Jesus was a moral teacher or a good example, and that's all, you're lost. If you think there are other ways to be saved apart from Jesus Christ, then you're rejecting what Jesus says, you're rejecting what God says, you're lost. Anyway, the crowd, they hear what Jesus says here, and yet they're still confused. Look at verse 30. So they were seeking to seize him, and no man laid his hand on him because his hour had not yet come. But many of the crowd believed in him, and they were saying, when the Christ comes, he will not perform more signs than those which this man has, will he? And so some of these Jews were seeking to seize him, right? It wasn't happening yet. Many in the crowd, many in the crowd believed in him. That is, they're beginning to think that he was in fact the Messiah. They see what Jesus is doing, and they're beginning to use logic. And they ask the question, when Christ comes, he will not perform more signs than those which this man has, will he? Which, when you look at that statement, it's a curious statement, right? They're still expecting a Messiah to come when the Christ comes. And the implication of that statement is that Jesus might not be the one. But then they also doubt that anyone else would do as many signs and wonders that Jesus is doing, right? Will they do more signs than this man has done? And so they're beginning to believe that Jesus is the one. But they also seem to base their faith on signs. And that says something about their faith, or I would say their lack of faith. Thomas had that type of faith. He needed to see in order to believe. I would argue that the entire Pentecostal charismatic movement has that so-called type of faith, where they claim these miraculous signs and wonders, and all it is just subjective feelings and emotions. They claim signs and wonders, and they need those signs and wonders in order to believe what God has already revealed and has made clear. Of course, faith like Thomas' faith is not the type of faith you want to have. Jesus rebuked that kind of faith, right? Nevertheless, some people here in this crowd, 6 months before that last Passover, some are starting to believe that Jesus is the Messiah. And when the Pharisees find out about it, these guys, how do you think they feel, right? They're not too happy. They want blood. Look at verse 32. The Pharisees heard the crowd muttering these things about him, and the chief priests and the Pharisees sent officers to seize him. And so the crowd's talking about Jesus, they're reasoning about him, but they're being quiet about it, right? The word that's being used here is muttering. The crowd is muttering these things. They're being quiet about it. They're trying not to be loud enough for the religious leaders to hear. Why? Because they know that the religious leaders are going to put you out of the synagogue, but still the Pharisees, they hear it. And when they hear it, they're not too happy. They don't even want people saying his name. That's a name we don't use around these here parts. That name isn't even part of our vocabulary. And so it's bad enough that the people are talking about Jesus. It's even worse that people are beginning to believe in him. Now, you might remember these Pharisees, they're the people's party. That is, they're generally more popular with the masses. You also might remember another group called the Sadducees. And, they tend to be in charge of the council, we think, the Sanhedrin, the ruling council of Jerusalem. As far as we understand, a lot of evidence points that they were the guys who kind of controlled, they were in charge of the ruling council. But they're in the minority in the general population, and they don't have a lot of influence with the masses. The Pharisees do. And so the Sadducees use the Pharisees in order to influence the masses to get things done. And now Jesus is influencing those masses, and the religious leaders don't like that. They can't wait around anymore remember, they wanted to arrest him privately. Well, now it's like that option is gone. Now they're like, no, we are sending out officers to seize him, to arrest him now, public or private. And so the chief priests and the Pharisees sent officers to seize him. Think of these guys these are like the temple police. They were guards of the treasury and the temple complex and stuff like that. Most of the priests would come from the tribe of Levi. Well, these guys weren't necessarily priests. They were just Levites. They were from the tribe of Levi. Think of them kind of like the Roman Praetorian Guard. Now, the head guard, the head officer, would typically sometimes come from, he would come from a priestly family. And every once in a while, Rome, because by now Rome is appointing the high priest. And so Rome would make the head guard or the captain of the temple, they would make him the next high priest. That's kind of like Joe Biden picking your president. I mean, your pastor. Would anybody in this room want Joe Biden picking your deciding how you get out of Afghanistan? I mean, deciding who your next pastor is going to be. Like, nobody in their right mind would want Joe Biden or Kamala Harris choosing who their pastor was going to be, right? And it's not just Joe Biden. I mean, we wouldn't want the state deciding who our pastor is going to be, period. I wouldn't want Donald Trump picking who my pastor was going to be. Because it ended up being someone like Paula White, who's a false teacher. Well, anyway, the high priest was selected by Rome. Oftentimes, or sometimes, they picked the head officer to become the religious leader of the land. That just kind of shows you where, and the Pharisees and Sadducees are okay with this. So that just shows you how wildly corrupt things are at the time. Pharisees, they send out officers to arrest Jesus. Now, at this point, I want to hear what happens with that arrest, but John presses pause on that. He doesn't tell us what happens yet. We'll actually let the suspense build on that a little bit. We'll find out what happens with that next week. But for now, John kind of goes back to Jesus' teachings in verses 33 and 34. Therefore, Jesus said, "For a little while longer, I am with you. Then I go to him who sent me. You will seek me and will not find me, and where I am, you cannot come." See, Jesus knows what's going on. He knows that the guards are coming to arrest him. He knows that they won't be successful just yet, but they will get to him eventually. And so Jesus says, "For a little while longer, I am with you." That is, I'm not going away just yet, but soon Jesus will go to the one who sent me. That is, he'll return to his Father in death and resurrection. Jesus will suffer a painful and brutal death on the cross. It doesn't end there. Jesus will rise from the dead. He'll return to the glory that he had with the Father before the world existed. And because of that, we can be confident. We can be confident that we'll also rise from the dead, that we'll have everlasting life. When Jesus returns to his Father, people might seek him here on earth. They won't be able to find him. He won't be on earth anymore. He'll be ascended into heaven. And so they can look all they want, but they won't find him. Now, here's kind of a prediction of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. It's shrouded a little bit. It's not super, super clear for the audience. Later on, you can look back at it and say, oh, that's very clear. But at the time, the people hear this and they're confused, right? As is typical. Look at verses 35 and 36. The Jews then said to one another, where does this man intend to go that we will not find him? He is not intending to go to the dispersion among the Greeks and teach the Greeks, is he? What is this statement that he said, you will seek me and will not find me, and where I am, you cannot come? The Jews completely misunderstand what Jesus is saying. They think he's going to go throughout the Roman Empire. They think he plans to go and teach Jews throughout Rome, and they suspect that he might go and teach Gentiles. And of course, we know that's not what Jesus is saying here. Jesus is not going to go through the Roman Empire. He's going to go to the cross, and he's going to ascend up into heaven. But we also know that his followers will go throughout Rome. They'll go to the Greek-speaking Jews of the Roman Empire. They'll go to the Gentiles and preach the gospel, and you can read about much of that in the book of Acts. In this passage, we see confusion about Jesus. We see rejection of him. It's a theme that runs throughout this gospel. It's a theme that's we're going to continue to see. Confusion about Jesus and rejection of him. And those same things still happen today. People are confused about who Jesus is, and they're confused about what he did. They're confused about the gospel. They don't realize the consequences of their sin. They don't realize that they can't save themselves by means of their own good works. A lot of people think, oh, if I do enough good works, I'm good to go. Or they'll think baptism contributes to salvation, or the sacraments, or communion, or whatever. They don't realize that if I could be justified by the works of the law, then Christ died for nothing. This is why Jesus came. Jesus came because we cannot save ourselves. They don't realize that salvation is by grace through faith alone in the completed work of Christ on the cross alone, and there is no other way. There are people who are confused, people that we know, people that we hang out with, people that are in our families, people just like these people at the Feast of Booths who are confused about Jesus. There are other people we know who do understand the gospel, and yet they reject it. They reject it for a distorted gospel, for a lesser gospel, a gospel of works, a gospel that's faith plus works, a sacramental salvation like so many of the mainline denominationals hold to. They seem to understand the gospel and reject it. The fact of the matter is, Jesus is the Messiah of God. And he died on the cross to pay the penalty for your sin. And you can have salvation in no other name, in no other work besides Jesus' work on the cross, only by placing your faith in him. Jesus was sent by God to seek and to save that which was lost. There's nothing confusing about it if you trust what God says. There's no good reason to reject it because your eternity depends on it. And so I understand I'm preaching to the choir for the most part here today, but you need to place your faith in the completed work of Jesus on the cross. You need to commit to being a genuine follower of him, and you need to tell your friends and family that Jesus is the Messiah of God, who died on the cross to pay the penalty for their sin. And you need to call them to place their faith in him. What I think too often happens is I think people want to think the best of the people they know and love. They want to think the best of their friends or their family and that type of stuff. And so they rely on very ambiguous claims of faith or people who have never really committed their lives to Jesus Christ and say, well, he's saved because he prayed some prayer so many years ago, and neglect the obligation that we have to call our lost loved ones to genuine faith in Jesus Christ. Don't let confusion reign among your friends and your family. Don't let an ambiguous gospel or an unclear gospel or I accepted Jesus into my heart type of a gospel. Don't let these unclear, confusing messages reign true to the people you care about. You tell them the truth that they need to place their faith in the completed work of Christ on the cross, and it is the only way to be saved. And then they need to take up their cross and follow him. Or else I might say that you're culpable, that in accepting these confusing gospels as legitimate, or these mere professions of faith as legitimate, you're responsible in some way because you're not calling people who may be lost to genuine salvation. Jesus is the Messiah of God. He died on the cross to pay the penalty for our sins so that we can have everlasting life by faith in him.